So, why did you write the fundamentals of adopting the NIST cybersecurity framework?
The basic, all right, the before um, um, finally met each other in 2008, um, we had independently looked at things from uh, a perspective that was broader than most. We didn't necessarily see problems as technical problems. And fade out to our meeting and some of the collaboration that we've done, we did some work on the Resilia product. And because it looked like a way to fit with a whole lot of organizations, but it never really gained the traction that we had anticipated. And our view of cybersecurity was that it wasn't a technical problem, yet that's where a lot of organizations consigned it. And part of what we were trying to do in writing the book was to make it clear that this is a responsibility that starts at the board level, at the most senior management, because as a risk-based framework, it's up to the board, not the IT department, to determine organizational risk. And it's up to the board to determine the tolerances and the risk appetite that they have in terms of what they need to do and how they need to protect their organization. And it's not just a technical protection, it's a protection of reputation, it's a protection of property. In looking at one of the things that last night there was a television show called 60 Minutes in the States. And one of the things that one of the interviewers was, or interviewees was Director Wray, who was head of the FBI. And he said that the thing that keeps him up at night are cybersecurity threats, particularly from nation states like China that are stealing U.S. intellectual property. And concern. That's not a technical concern. And the reason that we wrote the book was to try and make it clear that organization has to address this, not the technology department. Any organization is only as secure as its weakest link. And that's just not technology. That can be somebody in HR. It can be somebody in their supply chain that clicks on a link that has access to something. So that it really requires a holistic view of the organization and where it fits in its environment and ecosystem. And it's the whole thing that has to be protected, not just the technology stuff. And what we were trying to do, the central message in the book, that you have to, any value that you create has to be appropriately protected. That this idea of creating and protecting value are two different sides of the same coin. So that the essence of what we're saying is that value that is created without being protected, in a sense, has no value to the consumer because of that lack of protection. And that's the central message that we're trying to get across.
Yeah, I think that's perfect, especially mentioning that it's not just a technical problem for businesses. Dave, what would you like to add to that?
Well, I'd like to go back a little bit further. Before David and I got involved in even discussing writing the book, I had a conversation with a well-known, established cybersecurity expert. And he was talking to me about assessments, and he did assessments, and he was talking to me about how he did them and everything like that. And then at the end of this the conversation, I asked him, okay, once you give your customer the assessment, what happens? And I didn't get a blank stare. He basically shrugged his shoulders. I don't know. Okay. And that's where I kind of saw a disconnect between all of the mechanics of being able to assess your cybersecurity posture with a total lack of understanding of what you had to do to actually do something about mitigating that risk. And my background goes back to after I got out of the service, I worked for a manufacturing company. And in the late 70s, I picked up a book called Quality is Free, written by Philip Crosby. And the basic tenet of that book was that quality is actually free because it costs when your product does not conform to requirements. And it basically says you have to build quality into your product. You cannot audit or inspect a quality in. And shortly after that, in the mid 80s, I crossed over to the dark side, all right, and started managing large scale software development organizations. And that's when I discovered systems thinking, and I applied that and building quality into the product as basically what I did and how I did it for about 11 years in building large scale business applications. Now, as David said, flash forward to 2008, that's when we first met. And I like to say I taught David everything he knows about service management. All right, but I'm just kidding. He was one of my students. But we've collaborated since 2010 on a lot of different projects. And surprisingly, while we have a considerably different background, we've converged over these core concepts of what you do and how you do it. Now, in the context of cybersecurity, the NIST cybersecurity the framework, as we mentioned, is relatively simple to understand. The devil is in the details. What do you actually have to do organizationally to get ready to go adopt it, which is basically governance? All right. This is what we want to do to mitigate our cybersecurity risks. And then adapting the cybersecurity controls to your particular context, setting your own bar, and then getting over it. We went out there and we looked, and there's nothing really out there at the time, and pretty much still, that really guides an organization to stop, think, and figure out, okay, we're going to go do this. How do we actually go do it? So the guidance in our book, the guidance we tried to make sure we put in the book, is really addresses both from the board level, as David talked about, pretty much down to the individual sitting at their desk in accounting. This is what you need to know about the framework, about adopting it, all right, and the things that you have to do to get your organization ready to adapt its controls to your context.
Yeah, that's such a great answer because I think now so many people are becoming aware of cybersecurity, but there's that gap then. What do they do next? You know, they're aware of it, but how do they actually implement it? So I think this is great that you're here today, you know, all of you to explain more about how they actually take the next step